The name of the film is 15 Days. The name comes from an improvised alter ego that a friend of mine came up with on the spot when I first met him. He chose the name because 15 days was the last time that the police had come to take his things. And so for me, that alter ego became so powerful and emblematic of the kind of subjectivity that you embody when you live in a situation in which you're constantly being aggressed upon and surveilled. The film was an attempt to address some of the imagery and some of the discourse around the so-called migrant crisis in Europe and try and look at it from a more distilled point of view that actually comes from the very particular insight of someone actually living on the border of northern France after the flattening of the jungle. So I think the film, loosely speaking, is about his observations and his insights into the way in which the nation-state has enclosed and encroached upon his life and his hopes and desires and his dreams. My first encounters with the camp were really a sense of shock at the level of police presence. And actually what I encountered was complete containment. I encountered a ring of police, constant surveillance, and a sense that people were being confined to the camp. And that's not to say the people that were living there didn't have agency, because that's far from the truth, but rather that agency was very heavily conditioned and hemmed in. So I think for me, this sense of being able to stay there for a prolonged period of time was really about getting to know people and getting to hear the depth of their stories. There's a difference between data and information and hearing it from someone where you actually know what they mean. And you can only truly know what someone means when you know them. And so I think this was the central thing of wanting to spend as much time in the camps with people as I could.
This is how Jonas wari. Aganima khupura insan na. Lidal au na lidal. Lamal. Ariza.
Well, my interest, more than inspiration, in this work is really to try and challenge the sort of the modern colonial conception of the nation-state and how it's problematic and violent towards people coming from marginal positions and people coming from other parts of the world. My entire family has an immigrant background, so I'm half Italian, half Bangladeshi. And I think what was interesting from my point of view is to see how this narrative around migration has always been synonymous with a sort of neo-colonial kind of experience, but how it's morphed in terms of sort of very virulent Islamophobia and a very, very strict, non-porous boundary between East and West that people are having to breach in illegal ways when in previous years they were allowed to come legally.
Batizi, Khamushi Sara, Yobal Chirta, Agonoro Gonde.
The film is constructed around a kind of computer-generated scenario. I was thinking a lot about the canon of imagery around the migrant crisis and how it becomes impossible to visually render a migrant or refugee without the weight of prejudice on their shoulders. And I wanted to be able to convey both the humanity and the dehumanization of the situation there by allowing someone to speak their truth, but doing it through a proxy body that didn't then in turn put their real body, their flesh and bones, their sinew in danger. There was a sense that this tent, this kind of quite frail structure, really became a proxy for the body, for this skin and these bones. I wanted the tent to suffer the aggression of the state for once, you know, or rather that the visual language around brutality and beatings and physical violence would have to be endured by this temporary structure. I decided to work with an actor called Elham Esas, who's a Pashto and Dari speaking actor from Wembley, who began life in Afghanistan and at certain points in his life was also a refugee. His insight, knowing his life story, became central to this kind of, in a sense, heavily mediated narrative that started from one person's mouth and has been sort of interpreted variously by myself and Elham. The opening scene, the soundtrack orbits around this whispered prayer. The word that I heard constantly while I was there was inshallah, which means God willing. There's a sense that Arabic became a sort of, or certainly like Quranic scripts became a shared cultural and religious reference that kind of gave people hope. So I wanted to reflect that in the sense that whilst the environment seems or is painted as sort of relentlessly abject and hopeless, that actually there's a thread of levity and hope there based in religion that I thought was really important to reflect somehow.